Hello everyone, welcome to Tangled Threads. If you enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Let's go. It's strange how we pick up on subtle changes in the people we live with. It's even stranger when these changes lead you to discover a trail of deceit so thick it could suffocate you. This is the story of how I uncovered my wife's betrayal, a story that is part racy suspense, part Kafka-esque ordeal, and part costly education. Let me walk you through it. A little about myself. My name is Anthony, an heir to a vast publishing empire. Growing up with a silver spoon, cars were just another amenity, delivered when needed, whisked away when done. So, naturally, when our Lexus developed engine trouble, I had no clue what to do. In my moment of vulnerability, I confessed this to Victoria, my wife. The flicker in her eyes should have warned me that something was about to change. A day later, Victoria declared she would handle the car troubles. It seemed uncharacteristic, but I figured it was a change of pace for her. When she returned from the local garage, she spoke animatedly about a mechanic named Rob. I remember how her face lit up with intrigue when she spoke about Rob explaining the engine issues, the texture of the oil, and its significance. Then the calls started. The first time Rob called, Victoria was in the kitchen. I remember her eyes lighting up when she saw his name on the caller ID. "Hi Rob, what's up?" she asked, her voice laced with unexpected excitement. "There's a slight issue, ma'am," Rob said, his tone apologetic. "The boys at the shop used the wrong type of oil for your engine. It's not going to hurt your car, but we should correct it ASAP." "Oh, that's inconvenient," Victoria said, a touch of annoyance in her voice. But the look on her face told a different story. There was a thrill in her eyes, a spark of anticipation that seemed out of place for such a mundane call. The following day, Rob's call came again. Victoria answered almost immediately. "Rob, is there another problem?" "Yes, ma'am, afraid so," Rob's voice sounded, this time sounding a bit more distressed. "When we ran a full diagnostic on your Lexus, the code suggested the front rims needed replacement. We didn't catch it the first time. I apologize for the oversight." Victoria's face revealed a hint of exasperation, but her voice was calm, even cheerful. "Not your fault, Rob. These things happen. I'll bring the car in." For the following days, the pattern continued. Rob would call, Victoria would answer, and there'd be another issue, another reason to return to the garage. Each call seemed to fuel her excitement, even as she pretended to be annoyed with the inconvenience. During one of these calls, I remember her laughing at something Rob had said. "You're so funny, Rob," she giggled, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Sure, I'll bring the car back. We can't have the engine misbehaving, can we?" As I watched my wife's face light up with every call, her usual calm demeanor replaced by unusual giddiness, my suspicions grew. That was the moment I decided to hire the private investigator, Craig. I remember the first meeting, the tight-lipped seriousness on his face as he heard my suspicions, the gruff, reassuring voice promising to get to the bottom of it. The next few days were a blur of tense anticipation. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, expecting an update from Craig. When it finally came, I was stunned. As Craig detailed his findings, his voice steady and detached, I felt a chilling numbness envelop me. There were photos, a damning audio recording, even video footage. Victoria and Rob in clandestine meetings, secret liaisons. I remember staring at the images, a painful knot tightening in my stomach. Victoria's face, so radiant and alive, etched a painful memory. With Craig's evidence in hand, I approached a divorce attorney. He was an older gentleman, his face a mask of stoic professionalism as he leafed through the evidence. A restrained nod from him confirmed it. We had an open and shut case. The day I served Victoria the divorce papers, I remember the shock on her face. Her eyes darted between the documents and me, trying to reconcile the reality of the situation. I watched as her face turned from surprise to defiance and finally, resignation. The courtroom drama was intense. During the first hearing, we took a short recess. I noticed as I walked to my car, Victoria gestured for me to follow her into the adjacent hallway, a solemn look on her face. She was noticeably quieter, her usual vivaciousness replaced with a nervous energy. I remember the sterile smell of the courthouse and the way the fluorescent lights flickered overhead as we walked in silence. Once we were out of earshot of our attorneys, she turned to face me. "Anthony," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, "I need to explain. I owe you that much." I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, watching her closely. Her eyes darted around, avoiding my gaze. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked at me, her eyes brimming with regret. I didn't mean for this to happen, Anthony. She hesitated, wringing her hands nervously. I fell in love with Rob. Her confession stung, despite my already knowing the truth. Seeing the admission on her face, hearing it from her lips felt like a punch in the gut. Still, I stood silent, waiting for her to continue. But that's not all, she said, her voice cracking. I also fell in love with cars, with the knowledge that Rob possessed, the passion he showed, something I never saw in you. Her words echoed in the cold hallway, the bitter truth of her words settling in. She looked at me, her eyes full of regret. You never understood them, Anthony. You never tried. In my eyes, real men are into cars. They understand them, respect them. They don't just use them. Her revelation was a blow. I stared at her, struggling to keep my emotions in check. She had cheated not just because of my wealth and lack of knowledge about cars, but because I failed to live up to her definition of a real man. We stood in silence for a moment, the tension between us palpable. Then the court clerk called us back into the room, breaking the heavy silence. As we walked back, I realized the extent of Victoria's betrayal. It was not just physical. It was a rejection of who I was, my lifestyle, my passions. It was a harsh realization, but one that brought a strange kind of clarity. From that moment on, the court proceedings took on a different tone. I was not just fighting for my rights, I was fighting for my self-respect. And when the judge granted the divorce, the restraining order, and the no alimony verdict, it felt like a victory not just legally, but personally as well. The judge, a stern woman with a hawk-like gaze, listened intently as my attorney laid out the case. Victoria's attorney, a young man with a desperate look in his eyes, tried to counter the evidence, but my quick wit and proof was too good for him. I remember the moment the judge granted the divorce, the restraining order, and the no alimony verdict. Victoria's face, once radiant, now held a look of crushed defeat. The aftermath was a whirlwind of emotion, a sense of loss, a feeling of betrayal, and above all, a surprising relief. As I watched Victoria walk out of the courtroom, her face drained of color and life, I felt a strange sense of closure. A surreal chapter in my life had ended. I had learned the hard way about trust, betrayal, and the nuances of car maintenance. Looking back, the most bizarre part was not the infidelity itself, but the curious way it unveiled itself. A rogue mechanic, mysterious calls, and a series of questionable garage trips. So yes, my wife cheated with our mechanic, but it taught me lessons that money couldn't buy. It led me through an emotional labyrinth that left me wiser and stronger. And in the end, it gave me an oddly satisfying ending to a tale that I still struggle to believe is mine. Update 1. Hey Internet. Several months have passed since the courtroom drama, and I'm happy to say life has taken an unexpectedly glorious turn. My publishing empire has been flourishing, surpassing all previous records. Every morning I walk into my office with a sense of pride and purpose that feels new and invigorating. A renewed passion for my work had blossomed, filling a void I hadn't realized existed. Personal life has been equally rewarding. I've started dating again. Her name's Emily, a brilliant tech entrepreneur. Her warm smile, sparkling intelligence, and shared love for old literature have breathed new life into me. She respects my passions and interests and doesn't expect me to change or adapt to her image of a real man. Instead, we celebrate our differences, which, to my surprise, has brought us closer than any shared interest ever could. I've also recently moved into a new house, a beautiful villa overlooking the coast. With its high ceilings, modern design, and a fantastic view of the Azure Sea, it's the dream house I didn't know I wanted. Oh, and I haven't forgotten the car. I splurged on a new Tesla Model S. It's a beauty, and I've actually taken an interest in understanding its inner workings. Who would have thought? Just when I thought life couldn't get any better, an old friend called with unexpected news. Victoria, my ex-wife, was in prison. Apparently she had met a new guy named Rob at a local bar, and they began attending the bar together frequently. One night she and Rob were at a bar, both drunk. A heated argument turned physical, and Victoria attacked Rob. Witnesses say she broke a beer bottle and lunged at him. The police were called, Rob was taken to the hospital, and Victoria was arrested. She was later convicted of assault with a deadly weapon. My first reaction was shock. Then a wave of pity washed over me. Here was a woman who had once been my world, and now her life had spiraled out of control. Despite everything, I felt no joy in her misfortune. However, as I reflected on everything, I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. Victoria had left me because she believed I wasn't a real man. Now, she was in prison. her life in shambles, while mine was on an upswing. Life has a way of balancing things out, doesn't it? Here I am at the top of my game professionally, deeply in love, living in a beautiful house, driving a car that's the envy of many. Meanwhile, Victoria's life took a dramatic downturn. This experience has taught me a lot. To value myself, my interests, and my passions. To be comfortable in my own skin, whether I fit someone else's definition of a real man or not. And to never let someone else's deceit define me. After all, life has a way of showing us who's been driving on the wrong side of the road. Wow, Victoria's going to find it tough keeping up with car mechanics in the slammer. Maybe instead she'll learn something about consequences. Just goes to show, karma certainly does drive its own route. What do you think? Let us know in the comments section below. When you subscribe, be sure to click the notification bell. Click here for more Tangled threads.